The blood was spreading faster than Clara Bennett had anticipated, soaking through the makeshift bandage she pressed against the young ranch hand's thigh as he writhed on the wooden table in the bunkhouse, his screams echoing off the rough-hewn walls while 3 other injured men waited their turn in various states of consciousness. It was late September in 1883, and the cattle drive gone wrong had brought half a dozen wounded men back to the Double R Ranch outside of Abilene, Texas, transforming what should have been a routine afternoon into something that looked more like a battlefield hospital. Clara had arrived at the ranch only 2 weeks earlier, hired as the cook and general housekeeper after the previous woman had run off with a traveling preacher. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and desperately in need of honest work after her father's death had left her with nothing but debts in Kansas City. The ranch owner, Mr. Rutherford, had been skeptical about hiring a woman alone, but his wife had vouched for Clara's character, and the wage he offered was better than anything else she could find. Nobody had mentioned that the job might occasionally involve trying to keep men from bleeding to death on a Wednesday afternoon. The accident had happened when a spooked longhorn charged through the herd, causing a stampede that sent men and horses scattering in every direction. Some had been trampled, others thrown from their mounts, and one had been gored by a bull's horn before the situation was brought under control. The nearest doctor was in town, a 2-hour ride away, and Mr. Rutherford had sent his fastest rider to fetch him. But that was 40 minutes ago, and these men needed help now. Clara had learned basic wound care from her mother, who had tended to soldiers during the final years of the war. It was knowledge born from necessity rather than formal training, but it was all she had to work with. She had boiled water, gathered clean linens, and assembled the limited medical supplies the ranch kept on hand. Then she had rolled up her sleeves and gotten to work. The young man on the table, barely 19, had a deep gash in his leg from where he had fallen onto a broken fence post. Clara could see the muscle beneath the torn flesh, and she knew she needed to clean and close the wound before infection set in. Her hands moved with surprising steadiness as she poured whiskey over the injury, ignoring his howls of pain. She threaded a needle with practiced efficiency, her mother's voice echoing in her memory with instructions about small, even stitches. She was halfway through closing the wound when she felt someone watching her. Clara glanced up and found herself looking into the darkest eyes she had ever seen. The man stood in the doorway of the bunkhouse, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame, his hat in his hands. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and black hair that fell past his collar. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested both strength and gentleness, an unusual combination that Clara found immediately compelling. "You need help, ma'am?" His voice was low and steady, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent his whole life under the Texas sun. Clara nodded toward one of the other injured men. "That one has a dislocated shoulder. If you can hold him steady, I can try to set it after I finish here." The cowboy moved into the room with fluid grace, stepping around the pools of blood on the floor without seeming to notice them. He positioned himself near the man Clara had indicated, but his eyes never left her face. There was something in his expression that made her acutely aware of how disheveled she must look, with blood staining her dress and sweat dampening her hair. But there was no judgment in his gaze, only what appeared to be genuine admiration. Clara finished the last stitch and tied it off, then wrapped the young man's leg in clean bandages. He had passed out somewhere around the 10th stitch, which was probably a mercy. She moved to the next patient, an older man with a badly bruised rib cage and what might have been a concussion. His breathing was shallow but steady, and his pupils responded normally to light. She decided he would be all right with rest and careful monitoring. The man with the dislocated shoulder was next. He was conscious and clearly in considerable pain, his face pale and sweating. Clara had only set a shoulder once before, helping her mother with a neighbor who had fallen from a ladder. She remembered the technique, but not how much force it required. "What is your name?" she asked the cowboy who had offered to help. "James Cordell, ma'am. Most folks call me Cord." "I am Clara Bennett. Can you hold him from behind? Keep his body absolutely still no matter how much he struggles." Cord moved into position without hesitation, his strong arms wrapping around the injured man's chest. Clara took hold of the man's arm, feeling for the right angle. She took a breath, said a quick prayer, and then pulled hard while rotating the arm upward. There was a sickening pop, and the man screamed, but the shoulder slid back into its socket. The relief on his face was immediate. Clara fashioned a sling from a torn sheet, securing the arm against his body. "Keep it immobilized for at least 3 weeks," she instructed, "and someone needs to check on you regularly to make sure it does not slip out again." The remaining patients had less serious injuries, cuts and bruises that Clara cleaned and bandaged with efficiency. By the time she finished, more than an hour had passed and her dress was ruined beyond saving. Her hands were steady as she worked, but she could feel exhaustion creeping through her bones. Cord had stayed the entire time, helping whenever she needed an extra pair of hands, following her instructions without question. He brought fresh water when she asked, held patients still when necessary, and disposed of the blood-soaked rags. He moved with quiet competence, and Clara found herself grateful for his presence in a way that went beyond mere practical assistance. When the last bandage was secured, Clara finally allowed herself to step back and survey her work. All 6 men were stable, their wounds cleaned and dressed as well as she could manage. The doctor would hopefully arrive soon to provide more expert care, but she had done what needed to be done. None of them would die today, at least not from their injuries. Clara walked outside into the late afternoon sunlight, stripping off her bloodied apron and letting the cool air wash over her face. Her hands were beginning to shake now that the immediate crisis had passed, the delayed reaction to everything she had just done. She had never tended to so many serious injuries at once, and the responsibility of it weighed heavily on her shoulders. Cord followed her out carrying a dipper of clean water. "You did good in there," he said, offering her the water. "Real good. I have seen army surgeons who were not as calm under pressure." Clara drank gratefully, the cool water soothing her parched throat. "I was terrified the entire time. I kept thinking about everything that could go wrong." "Could not tell," Cord said. "You looked like you had been doing it your whole life." "My mother taught me. She helped during the war." Clara handed back the dipper and looked at her stained hands. "I should wash up before Mrs. Rutherford sees me like this. She will think I murdered someone." A hint of a smile crossed Cord's face, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his features, making him look younger and more approachable. "I reckon she will understand, given the circumstances, but there is a pump behind the barn, if you want privacy." Clara nodded and started walking in that direction, only to have her knees suddenly give out beneath her. The exhaustion and delayed shock were catching up with her all at once, making her legs feel like water. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground, and she found herself pressed against Cord's chest, his arms supporting her weight effortlessly. "Sorry," she gasped. "I just need a moment." "Take all the time you need," Cord said. His voice rumbled in his chest, and Clara could feel his heartbeat strong and steady. "You have earned it." He helped her to a bench near the barn, easing her down gently before sitting beside her. They stayed like that for several minutes, neither speaking, as Clara's breathing slowly returned to normal. The ranch bustled with activity around them, people going about their evening chores, but it felt like they existed in a small bubble of quiet. "How long have you worked here?" Clara asked finally, breaking the silence. "Coming up on 3 years now. Started as a regular hand, but Mr. Rutherford made me foreman about 6 months back." Cord stretched out his long legs, his spurs jingling softly. "It is good work, steady. He treats his people fair." "That is what I hoped when I took the position. I needed somewhere safe to land after my father passed." "I am sorry for your loss." Cord's voice was gentle. "It is hard, losing family." There was something in the way he said it that suggested personal experience. Clara glanced at him, taking in the lines around his eyes that seemed too deep for a man in his mid-20s. You have lost people too." It was not a question, and Cord did not treat it like one. "My parents and younger sister, Cholera, back in '69. I was 17. He stared out at the horizon, his jaw tight. "After that, I drifted for a while, working ranches from here to Montana. Took me a long time to want to stay anywhere." "But you stayed here." "Yes. This place, it feels like it could be home. First time I have felt that way since I lost my family." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes intense. "What about you? You planning to stay, or is this just a stopping point?" Clara considered the question. 2 weeks ago, she would have said she was just passing through, that she would move on as soon as something better came along. But something about the Double R Ranch had already begun to feel right to her. Maybe it was the kindness of Mrs. Rutherford, or the honest work, or the way the wide Texas sky made her feel like she could breathe for the first time in months. Or maybe it was the way this cowboy was looking at her, like she was something rare and valuable. "I think I would like to stay," she said softly. "If they will have me. They would be fools to let you go after what you did today." Cord stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, let me walk you back to the main house. You should rest before you have to start supper." Clara took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. He pulled her to her feet easily, and she was struck again by how tall he was, how solid. There was something reassuring about his presence, like he was the kind of man who would stand between trouble and anyone he cared about. They walked slowly toward the main house, where Clara had a small room off the kitchen. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed, and the scent of dust and grass hung heavy in the air. It was a scene that would have been completely foreign to Clara just a few months ago, but it was beginning to feel like the place she was meant to be. "Miss Bennett," Cord said when they reached the porch steps. He had put his hat back on and his face was shadowed by the brim. "Would it be all right if I checked on you later, after supper maybe, just to make sure you were doing all right after everything?" Clara felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. "I would like that, Mr. Cordell." "Cord," he corrected with that hint of a smile again. "Please." "Then you should call me Clara." "Clara." He said her name like he was testing how it felt on his tongue, and Clara found herself liking the sound of it in his drawl. "I will see you this evening, then." He tipped his hat and walked away, his gait easy and unhurried. Clara watched him go, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. She had not come to Texas looking for romance. She had not been looking for anything except a way to survive. But life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. The doctor arrived an hour later, a gruff older man named Patterson who examined Clara's handiwork with grudging approval. He reinforced her stitches, splinted a few of the less serious injuries she had not had time to properly address, and pronounced that all the men would likely recover fully. He spent extra time with the young man with the leg wound, checking for signs of infection, but found none. "You did well," he told Clara when he was finished. "Better than some trained nurses I have worked with. Where did you learn?" "My mother," Clara explained, repeating what she had told Cord earlier. "She helped during the war. She taught you well. These men are lucky you were here." He packed up his bag and accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Rutherford. "I will come back in a few days to check on them, but I do not anticipate any complications if they follow your care instructions." After he left, Mrs. Rutherford pulled Clara aside. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. "My husband told me what you did today. That was well beyond what we hired you for, Clara." "I did what needed to be done," Clara said simply, "and we are grateful, very grateful." Mrs. Rutherford squeezed her hand. "You have more than earned your place here, my dear. I want you to know that we consider ourselves fortunate to have you." The words warmed Clara more than she expected. She had spent so long feeling adrift, like she did not belong anywhere, that hearing someone say she was wanted felt almost overwhelming. She excused herself to her small room where she finally changed out of her ruined dress and washed properly. By the time she emerged to start preparing supper, Clara felt almost human again. Her hands had stopped shaking, and her head had cleared. She moved through the familiar rhythms of cooking, preparing a hearty stew and fresh biscuits for the ranch hands who would be coming in hungry after a long day. It was soothing, this work, requiring just enough attention that she could not dwell on the afternoon's events, but not so much that she could not let her mind wander. She found herself thinking about Cord, about the way he had looked at her in the bunkhouse, about his quiet competence and gentle manner. She had known him for only a few hours, but there was something about him that felt different from other men she had met. He seemed solid, dependable, someone who said what he meant and meant what he said. And there had been genuine admiration in his eyes when he watched her work, not the dismissive condescension she had grown accustomed to from men who thought women were only good for cooking and cleaning. The ranch hands filed in for supper as the sun set, filling the long dining room with noise and laughter. Most of them were young, ranging from their late teens to early 30s, with a few older men mixed in. They were dirty and tired, but in good spirits, joking with each other as they loaded their plates. Clara served them from the kitchen, as was proper, though Mrs. Rutherford invited her to sit at the smaller family table where she and her husband ate. Cord came in with the last group, his hat dusty and his shirt stained with sweat. His eyes found Clara immediately, and he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement before taking his place at the foreman's spot near the head of the table. Clara tried not to watch him too obviously, but she found her gaze drawn to him repeatedly throughout the meal. The way he moved, the way he spoke to the men under his supervision with respect and authority, the way he seemed to command attention without demanding it. After supper, Clara cleared the dishes and began washing up. It was a task that usually took her more than an hour, especially after feeding 30 people. She was elbow-deep in soapy water when she heard the kitchen door open behind her. "Need help with those?" Cord's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Clara turned, surprised to find him standing in the doorway. Most cowboys would rather face down a charging bull than help with kitchen work, but here he was offering. "You do not have to do that. I know you have been working all day. So have you." He moved into the kitchen, rolling up his sleeves to reveal strong forearms tanned dark by the sun. "And you saved lives this afternoon. Least I can do is help with some dishes." They worked in companionable silence, Clara washing while Cord dried and stacked. It felt surprisingly natural, this domestic rhythm, like they had been doing it together for years instead of minutes. Clara found herself relaxing in his presence, the tension of the day slowly unwinding from her shoulders. "You said your mother helped during the war," Cord said after a while. "Which side?" It was a question that still mattered in Texas, where wounds from the conflict had not fully healed. Clara hesitated, then decided honesty was the only option. "The Union. My father was a supply officer in Missouri. My mother set up a hospital in our home for wounded soldiers passing through." She waited for judgment, for the cold distance that mention of Union sympathies could still provoke in former Confederate territory, but Cord just nodded thoughtfully. "Must have been hard seeing all that suffering, especially for someone so young." "I was just a child then, but old enough to remember, old enough to help sometimes." Clara scrubbed at a stubborn pot, her movements vigorous. "It taught me that pain is pain. Regardless of which uniform someone wears, blood all looks the same." "That is a wise way to see it." Cord set down the plate he was drying and turned to face her fully. "Clara, I want to ask you something, and I hope you will not think I am being too forward." Her heart started beating faster. "Go ahead." "Would you allow me to court you?" The words came out in a rush, like he had been holding them back all evening. "I know we just met, and I know it is not proper to ask so soon, but I have never felt like this before. Watching you today, seeing how brave and capable you are, how gentle with those men even when they were fighting you, I just knew. You are someone special, Clara, someone worth knowing, and I would like the chance to know you better, if you will let me." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that before, with such earnest sincerity. The few men who had shown interest in her back in Kansas City had been awkward or presumptuous, never this direct combination of respect and desire. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Cord's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He reached out and took her hand, soap bubbles and all, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "You have made me very happy." They finished the dishes together, talking quietly about their lives, their hopes, their fears. Clara learned that Cord had been born in Georgia but moved to Texas with his family when he was 12, that he loved horses more than cattle but worked with both, that his favorite time of day was dawn when the world was still quiet. Cord learned that Clara could read Latin, that she missed the theater from her days in Kansas City, that she had always wanted to see the ocean but never had the chance. By the time the last dish was dried and put away, it was full dark outside. Cord walked Clara to her door, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The kitchen was dim, lit only by a single lamp, and it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "Thank you for saying yes," Cord said quietly. "I promise I will do right by you." "I believe you." And Clara did, with a certainty that surprised her. Cord hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and respectful, but it sent warmth flooding through Clara's entire body. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "Sleep well, Clara. I will see you in the morning." "Good night, Cord." She watched him leave, then went into her small room and closed the door behind her. The space was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her belongings. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her hand coming up to touch her forehead where Cord's lips had been. She had come to Texas expecting nothing but hard work and loneliness. Instead, she had found purpose in tending those injured men, pride in her own capabilities, and the beginning of something that felt like it might be love. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and growing affection. Clara settled into her role at the ranch, her days filled with cooking, cleaning, and occasional medical assistance. She tended to the injured men from the stampede, changing bandages and monitoring their progress. All of them recovered well, and they treated her with a respect bordering on reverence, as if she had performed miracles rather than basic wound care. Cord was a constant presence in her life. He found excuses to be near her whenever his duties allowed, helping with heavy lifting, walking her to the hen house in the mornings, sitting with her on the porch in the evenings. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from philosophical debates to silly jokes that made them both laugh. Clara found herself looking forward to seeing him each day, her heart lifting whenever she heard his footsteps or caught sight of his tall figure crossing the yard. Their courtship was proper and respectful, as was expected. They were never alone together without someone nearby, and their physical contact was limited to held hands and the occasional kiss on the cheek or forehead. But there was an undercurrent of deeper feeling beneath the propriety, a growing awareness of each other that made even innocent touches feel charged with meaning. One evening in late October, Cord asked Clara to walk with him down to the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the ranch property. Mrs. Rutherford gave her permission, though she insisted that Clara's friend Maria, another ranch employee, accompany them as a chaperone. Maria was understanding enough to trail far behind, giving them the illusion of privacy while maintaining the appearance of propriety. The evening was cool, with the first real hint of winter in the air. Clara wore a shawl over her dress, and Cord had his jacket on. They walked slowly, their steps matched, occasionally brushing shoulders or hands. The creek burbled peacefully beside them, and the last light of sunset painted the sky in deep purples and reds. "I have been thinking," Cord said after they had walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, "about the future, about what I want my life to look like." Clara's heart began to pound, but she kept her voice steady. And what do you want? I want land of my own someday, not a huge spread, nothing fancy, but enough to run a decent herd and build a good house. Somewhere a man could raise a family. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. I have been saving my wages for 3 years now. Got a fair amount put aside. Mr. Rutherford has said he will help me find a good piece of property when I'm ready. Give me a starter herd at a fair price. That sounds like a wonderful dream, Clara said carefully, not sure where he was going with this. It was just a dream until a few weeks ago. Something I thought about but did not really believe in. Cord took both her hands in his grip warm and strong. But now I can see it clearly. Now I know exactly what I want that life to look like. Because I want you in it, Clara. I want to build that house with you, raise that family with you, grow old with you. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. Cord, we have only known each other a few weeks. I know. And I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I know we need more time. That you need to be sure. His thumbs stroked the backs of her hands. But I'm asking if you think someday you might want that too. Because if there is no chance, I need to know now, before my heart is so deep in this that I cannot get it back. Clara looked up into his face, seeing the vulnerability there, the hope and fear mixed together. She thought about the past few weeks, about how right it felt to be near him, how safe and valued he made her feel. She thought about his kindness, his integrity, the way he treated everyone from the youngest ranch hand to Mr. Rutherford himself with the same basic respect. She thought about how he looked at her like she hung the moon, and how that look made her feel like maybe she could. Yes, she said softly. Someday I think I would want that very much. The relief and joy on Cord's face were so intense that Clara felt her own eyes fill with tears. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a hug that lifted her feet off the ground. She laughed, clinging to his shoulders, and when he set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. You have made me the happiest man in Texas, he said roughly. Then we are even because you have made me the happiest woman. He kissed her then, really kissed her, his lips meeting hers with a gentleness that quickly deepened into something more passionate. Clara had been kissed before, clumsy stolen kisses from boys back home, but this was different. This was a kiss full of promise and longing, a kiss that spoke of futures and forever. She kissed him back with all the feeling in her heart, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressed against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cord rested his forehead against hers. We should probably head back before Maria comes looking for us. Probably, Clara agreed, though neither of them moved. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms as the stars began to emerge overhead. Clara felt like her heart might burst from the fullness of it, this feeling that was so new and yet somehow felt like coming home. The walk back to the ranch house was slower, their fingers intertwined, their bodies close. Maria smiled knowingly when they rejoined her, but said nothing. When they reached Clara's door, Cord kissed her hand like a gentleman and bid her good night, but his eyes promised more for the future. Clara floated through the next several days in a state of euphoria. Everything seemed brighter, more beautiful. Even the endless chores felt less tedious because she knew Cord would find her eventually, would steal a few moments to talk or simply stand near her. The other ranch employees noticed the change between them and offered their congratulations, teasing them good-naturedly about when they would hear wedding bells. In mid-November, a cold snap hit the region, bringing temperatures that dipped below freezing at night. The ranch scrambled to prepare, moving livestock to more sheltered areas and ensuring that water sources would not freeze solid. Clara spent her days cooking hearty meals to keep the men warm and her evenings knitting by the fire, working on a scarf for Cord in dark blue wool. She was sitting in the kitchen one evening, needles clicking steadily, when Mrs. Rutherford came in looking worried. "Clara, dear, I need to ask something of you. One of the line cabins up in the north pasture reported that several men are sick with fever. My husband wants to send you up there with medicine and supplies along with Cord to ensure your safety. Would you be willing to go?" Clara set down her knitting immediately. "Of course. When do we leave?" "First light tomorrow. It is a hard ride, about 4 hours, and you will need to stay at least a night to tend them properly. Cord will keep you safe, and we will send another man along as well for propriety's sake." Clara packed her medical supplies carefully that night, including the herbs and remedies she had been collecting and preparing since her arrival. She filled her saddlebags with bandages, clean cloths, willow bark for fever, and various tinctures her mother had taught her to make. She also packed warm clothes and extra blankets, knowing that the line cabin would be rough and cold. Cord was waiting with the horses when Clara emerged just after dawn. The temperature had dropped further overnight, and her breath misted in the air. He had saddled a gentle mare for her, one of the best horses on the ranch, and his own big gelding stood nearby. A young cowboy named Pete would be riding with them, a fresh-faced 19-year-old who looked half frozen already. "Morning," Cord said, his smile warming her better than any fire. "Ready for an adventure?" "As ready as I will ever be," Clara replied, letting him help her mount. They rode out as the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky pink and gold. The landscape stretched endlessly around them, rolling grassland dotted with scrub brush and the occasional stand of trees. It was beautiful in its starkness, and Clara found herself understanding why people fell in love with this wild country. The ride was long and cold. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat a quick meal of biscuits and jerky. Cord stayed close to Clara the entire time, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the ranch's history. Pete rode ahead, giving them a semblance of privacy despite being within constant view. They reached the line cabin in early afternoon. It was a rough structure, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it had a working fireplace and enough space for several bunks. 3 men lay inside, all of them feverish and coughing. A 4th man, the only one still on his feet, looked exhausted and relieved to see them. Clara went to work immediately, examining each patient and determining that they all had the same illness, likely influenza. She mixed willow bark tea to bring down their fevers, made poultices for their chests to ease the coughing, and ensured they were drinking enough water. Cord helped her with the heavy lifting, fetching wood for the fire and water from the nearby stream. By evening, the men's fevers had broken, and they were resting more comfortably. The healthy cowboy, grateful for the help, offered to bunk with Pete in a smaller shelter nearby, giving Clara the cabin's only private corner. Cord would sleep near the fire, he said, to keep it going through the night. Clara prepared a simple meal from the supplies they had brought, and they all ate together in the warm cabin. The sick men were improving rapidly, which Clara attributed to youth and generally good health. They would need a few more days of rest, but she was confident they would all recover fully. As night fell and the others settled into sleep, Clara found herself sitting by the fire with Cord, their voices low to avoid disturbing the patients. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the gentleness in his eyes. "Thank you for coming with me," Clara said softly. "I would have been frightened to make this ride alone." "I would not have let you go alone," Cord replied. "Not just because it is dangerous, but because any excuse to spend time with you is one I will take." Clara smiled and reached for his hand. They sat like that for a long time, fingers intertwined, watching the flames dance. There was something intimate about this moment, something that felt like a glimpse of the future they had talked about. This could be their cabin someday, their fire, their quiet evenings together. "Clara," Cord said eventually, his voice rough with emotion, "I know I said I would not rush you, but I need you to know something. I love you. I have loved you since that first day, watching you save those men's lives, and every day since has just made me more certain." Clara's heart swelled until she thought it might break. "I love you too, Cord, so much it scares me sometimes." He turned to look at her, his eyes intense in the firelight. "Why does it scare you?" "Because I have never felt like this before. Because it feels too good to be true. and I keep waiting for something to go wrong." She squeezed his hand. "I lost my father so suddenly. One day he was there, and the next he was gone. It taught me that nothing is certain, that happiness can disappear in a moment." "You are right that nothing is certain," Cord said gently. "But that is all the more reason to hold tight to happiness when we find it. We cannot live in fear of loss. Clara, we just have to love as hard as we can for as long as we are given." His words settled something in Clara's chest, easing a fear she had not fully acknowledged until now. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They stayed like that until the fire burned low, taking comfort in each other's presence, bound together by love, and the promise of a future they would build side by side. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Clara checked on her patients and was pleased to find them all much improved. She left detailed instructions with the healthy Cowboy about their continued care, along with enough medicine to see them through another few days. Then she, Cord, and Pete mounted up for the long ride back to the main ranch. The journey back felt shorter somehow, probably because Clara's heart was so full. She and Cord talked about their plans, their dreams, the details of the life they wanted to build. He told her about a piece of land he had his eye on, about 200 acres with good water and grazing, close enough to town for convenience but far enough out for privacy. She told him about the kind of house she wanted. Nothing grand but sturdy and well-built, with a real kitchen and a porch for watching sunsets. They arrived back at the Double R Ranch as evening was falling. Mrs. Rutherford welcomed them with hot food and warm fires, listening to Clara's report about the sick men with approval. That night, as Clara lay in her bed, exhausted but content, she thought about how much her life had changed in just 2 months. She had come to Texas as a refugee, fleeing debt and memories. Now she had found a home, a purpose, and a love that felt strong enough to last a lifetime. The weeks leading up to Christmas were busy ones on the ranch. Cattle needed to be moved to winter pastures, fences needed to be repaired before the real cold set in, and 100 other tasks demanded attention. Clara threw herself into preparations for the holiday, determined to make it special for everyone on the ranch. She spent hours baking, producing pies and cookies and cakes that made the kitchen smell like heaven. She worked with Mrs. Rutherford to plan a special Christmas dinner, pooling resources to ensure there would be roasted beef, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and all the trimmings. The ranch hands were far from their families, and Clara wanted to give them a taste of home. Cord was often too busy to spend much time with her during this period, which made the moments they did steal together all the more precious. He would find her in the kitchen late at night, help her finish whatever task she was working on, and they would talk quietly about their plans. He had approached Mr. Rutherford about the land he wanted to buy, and the conversation had gone well. They had tentatively agreed on a price and terms, with the sale to go through in the spring. "That gives us time," Cord told Clara one evening as they sat on the porch despite the cold. "Time for me to save a bit more, time for us to be sure about each other, time to do this right." "I am already sure," Clara said, snuggling deeper into the blanket they shared. "So am I. But I want to court you properly the way you deserve. I want everyone to know that we did this right, that you are choosing me with a clear head and an open heart." Clara understood what he meant. In a place like this where everyone knew everyone's business, rushing into marriage could invite gossip or doubt. Better to take their time, let their love grow in full view of the community, so that when they finally married, no one could question it. Christmas Eve arrived with a light dusting of snow, rare enough in this part of Texas to cause excitement among the ranch hands. Clara watched from the kitchen window as grown men threw snowballs and tried to build a tiny snowman from the meager accumulation. Cord was in the middle of it all, laughing like a boy, and the sight made her heart overflow with affection. That evening, after the special dinner had been served and enjoyed, Mr. Rutherford called everyone into the main living room. It was the largest space in the house, with a real fireplace and enough room for all the ranch employees to crowd in. Clara stood near the back, expecting some kind of Christmas speech or announcement. Instead, Cord stepped forward, his hat in his hands. Looking nervous in a way Clara had never seen before, her heart began to race. "I know this is not the usual way to do things," Cord began, his voice carrying in the quiet room. "But I wanted all of you here as witnesses. You are my family, the people I work beside every day, and what I have to say matters to all of us." He turned and looked directly at Clara, his eyes locking onto hers. "Clara Bennett, you came into my life like a miracle. I have watched you heal the sick, bring joy to this house, and make every day brighter just by being in it. I have watched you face challenges with grace and courage, and I have fallen more in love with you with every passing moment." Clara's hands flew to her mouth as Cord dropped to one knee. The room erupted in whispers and exclamations, but she barely heard them. All she could see was Cord, looking up at her with his heart in his eyes. "I know I said we would wait, but I realized something. I do not want to wait to declare my intentions. I do not want to wait to tell the whole world that you are mine and I am yours." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Clara, will you marry me? Will you build that life with me, raise that family with me, grow old with me?" Tears were streaming down Clara's face, but she did not care. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The room exploded in cheers as Cord stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was kissing her, right there in front of everyone, and Clara was kissing him back, pouring all her love and joy and hope into that moment. When they finally broke apart, they were surrounded by well-wishers, people clapping them on the back and offering congratulations. Mrs. Rutherford was crying happy tears. Mr. Rutherford was grinning and shaking Cord's hand vigorously. The ranch hands were already planning the wedding celebration, talking over each other in their excitement. Clara looked down at the ring on her finger, then up at Cord's face, and felt like the luckiest woman alive. She had found her home, her purpose, and her love, all in this wild corner of Texas. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together. The wedding was planned for late March, giving them time to prepare and allowing Cord to finalize the land purchase. The winter months passed in a flurry of activity and anticipation. Clara sewed her wedding dress in the evenings, creating a simple but elegant gown from cream-colored silk that Mrs. Rutherford helped her order from a catalog. Cord worked extra hours, saving every penny he could toward their future. They spent their limited free time together planning every detail of their new life. Cord drew sketches of the house he wanted to build, and Clara suggested modifications, a bigger kitchen here, a window facing east there. They talked about how many children they wanted, where they would plant a garden, what they would name their first horse. In February, Cord took Clara to see the land that would soon be theirs. It was a beautiful piece of property, rolling grassland with a creek running through it and a stand of oak trees perfect for building near. Clara stood on a small rise, looking out over what would be their home, and felt such a sense of rightness that she could hardly breathe. "We will build the house there," Cord said, pointing to a spot near the trees. "Close enough to the creek for easy water, but high enough that we will not flood if it rises. The barn can go there and the corral's there. We will need a chicken coop, a root cellar, eventually a bunkhouse if we hire help." "It is perfect," Clara said simply. "It is absolutely perfect." Cord wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood like that for a long time, looking out over their future. Clara leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, strong and steady, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine, perfect weather for a late March celebration. The ceremony was held at the small church in Abilene, with most of the town turning out to witness it. Clara wore her silk dress and carried wildflowers picked that morning. Cord wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, looking so handsome that Clara's breath caught when she first saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Cord kissed Clara with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The reception was held back at the Double R Ranch, with tables set up in the yard and more food than Clara had ever seen in one place. There was music and dancing, speeches and toasts. Mr. Rutherford presented them with a generous wedding gift, several head of prime cattle to start their herd. Mrs. Rutherford gave Clara a hope chest filled with linens and kitchen goods. As the sun began to set, Cord and Clara slipped away from the celebration. They had a small cabin on their new property, just one room with a loft, built quickly over the past month to give them somewhere to live while they constructed the main house. It was rough but clean, with a good fireplace, and a real bed that Clara had helped furnish with quilts and pillows. Cord carried Clara over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the middle of their new home. The laughter faded as they looked at each other, suddenly aware that they were truly alone, truly married, with the whole night ahead of them. "Hello, wife," Cord said softly, reaching up to cup her face. "Hello, husband," Clara replied, her voice trembling slightly. What followed was tender and passionate, awkward and beautiful, all at once. They learned each other slowly with patience and care, their love expressing itself in touches and kisses and whispered words. When they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, Clara felt a contentment so deep it seemed to radiate from her bones. The next months were hard but rewarding. They rose before dawn and worked until after dark, building their life from the ground up. Cord began construction on the main house with help from friends from the Double R Ranch. Clara established a garden, planted fruit trees, and set up her kitchen in the small cabin. They worked side by side whenever possible, and even the most exhausting days felt joyful because they were doing it together. By June, the house was framed and roofed, with walls going up rapidly. It was larger than their first sketches had shown, expanded to include a proper bedroom, a real kitchen with a cast-iron stove, and a parlor for entertaining. There was even a small room that they left unfinished, not speaking of it but both knowing it was meant for a nursery. In July, Clara realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but confirmation from the doctor in town made it real. She waited until that evening, when she and Cord were sitting on the porch of their small cabin watching the sunset, to tell him, "Cord, I have something to tell you." Her voice was shaking, but with joy, not fear. He turned to look at her, immediately alert to her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am better than all right. I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Cord just stared at her, the words not quite registering. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the neighboring ranch. He scooped her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully, his hands hovering like he was afraid she might break. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby. In February, the doctor thinks." Cord dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her still flat stomach, his arms wrapping around her waist. Clara ran her fingers through his hair, her own eyes filling with happy tears. They had talked about children, planned for them, but the reality of it was overwhelming in the best possible way. The months that followed were busy as they rushed to finish the house before the baby arrived. Cord worked like a man possessed, determined to have his family settled in a real home, with real walls before winter set in. Friends and neighbors came to help with barn raisings and roof shingling, and slowly their ranch took shape. In late September, they finally moved into the finished house. It was everything Clara had dreamed of and more, with real glass windows, planed wood floors, and a kitchen that made her previous workspace look like a toy. She spent days arranging their belongings, hanging curtains, making the space feel like home. Her pregnancy progressed normally, though she tired more easily as fall turned to winter. Cord was endlessly solicitous, insisting she rest, taking over the heavier chores, fussing over her until she had to laugh and push him away. But his concern came from love, and Clara never doubted that she and their unborn child were the center of his world. Christmas came and went. a quiet celebration, just the two of them in their new home. They exchanged small gifts and talked about how different it would be next year with a baby in the house. Clara had been sewing tiny clothes and blankets, and Cord had built a beautiful cradle from oak carved with simple but elegant designs. In early February, during a cold snap that left frost on the windows, Clara's labor began. Cord rode hard to fetch Mrs. Rutherford and the doctor, his face pale with worry. By the time they arrived, Clara's contractions were coming regularly, and there was no doubt that the baby was coming soon. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Cord paced outside the bedroom, nearly wearing a path in the floor, until Mrs. Rutherford finally told him he might as well come in and be useful. He held Clara's hand through the final hours, offering her water and cool cloths, murmuring encouragement and love. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world screaming, a healthy baby with dark hair and a strong set of lungs. The doctor pronounced him perfect, and Mrs. Rutherford wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Clara's arms. Clara looked down at her son, this tiny person she and Cord had created, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. He was beautiful, with Cord's dark coloring and what looked like her nose. His little fingers wrapped around her thumb with surprising strength, and she fell completely in love. Cord sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Clara, looking at their son with wonder in his eyes. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are both perfect." "What should we name him?" Clara asked softly. They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son's face, Clara knew exactly what he should be called. "Samuel," she said, "after my father. Samuel James Cordell." Cord's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel James. I like that. He would be proud, your father." They spent the next hour just looking at their son, marveling at his tiny features, his perfect fingers and toes. Mrs. Rutherford and the doctor eventually left, satisfied that mother and baby were both healthy. Cord climbed carefully into bed beside Clara, and they lay there together, Samuel sleeping between them, and felt like the luckiest people in the world. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Samuel was a good baby overall, though he had his fussy periods like any infant. Clara marveled at how much she could love such a tiny person, how his needs became more important than sleep or food or anything else. Cord was a devoted father, helping with night feedings, walking the floor with Samuel when he cried, changing diapers without complaint. As spring arrived and Samuel grew stronger, they fell into a rhythm. Clara would work in the garden with Samuel sleeping in a basket nearby. Cord would take breaks from ranch work to come play with his son, making silly faces that brought out the baby's first smiles. They had help from a local woman who came twice a week to assist with heavier chores, giving Clara time to rest and focus on Samuel. Their ranch was thriving. The cattle Cord had started with had multiplied, and he had made several smart purchases that expanded their herd. They had chickens providing eggs, a milk cow, and plans to add more livestock as finances allowed. It was hard work, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. In June, they celebrated Samuel's first half-birthday with a small gathering of friends and neighbors. The house was filled with laughter and good food, and Clara looked around at the life they had built and felt profound gratitude. She caught Cord's eye across the room, and the look they exchanged was full of understanding and love. They had come so far from that day in the bunkhouse when she had been tending wounds, and he had watched in awe. That night, after their guests had left, and Samuel was asleep in his cradle, Clara and Cord sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments at day's end when they could just be together. "Do you ever think about that first day, Souf?" Clara asked, leaning against Cord's shoulder. "When the ranch hands were injured and you asked me to stay close?" "I think about it all the time," Cord admitted. "I think about how terrified I was that you would say no when I asked to court you. How certain I was that you were the one, even though we had just met. I felt it too, Clara said softly. That certainty. It scared me at first. Are you still scared? Clara thought about her answer. She thought about their son sleeping safely inside, about the home they had built, about the future that stretched ahead of them. No, she said finally. I am not scared anymore. I am just happy. So incredibly happy. Cord pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, bound together by love and commitment and the family they had created. The Wild West could be a harsh and unforgiving place, but they had found softness and joy in each other, and that was worth more than all the gold in California. Over the next few years, their family and ranch continued to grow. When Samuel was 2, Clara became pregnant again. Delivering a healthy daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth in the spring of 1887. Sarah had Clara's lighter coloring and a sunny disposition that made everyone who met her smile. Samuel was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. The ranch prospered under Cord's management. He had a gift for knowing which cattle to buy and sell, when to hold, and when to take risks. They hired 2 permanent ranch hands, young men from town who lived in the bunkhouse Cord had built. Clara cooked for everyone, grateful for her large kitchen and for the help of a woman from town who came 3 days a week to assist. Life was full and busy and rich with a meaning. Clara tended to scraped knees and childhood illnesses, taught Samuel his letters, and rocked Sarah to sleep with lullabies. Cord worked sunrise to sunset, building their herd and their reputation. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk about their day, about their dreams, about the future they were creating for their children. When Samuel was 5 and Sarah was 3, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, leaving her exhausted and sick for months. Cord hired additional help so she could rest, and Mrs. Rutherford came to stay for several weeks to assist with the children. Their second son, Thomas, was born in the winter of 1889, a difficult birth that left Clara weak for months afterward. But Thomas was worth every moment of struggle, a chubby baby with a quick smile and his father's dark eyes. Samuel and Sarah adored their little brother, fighting over who got to hold him and help care for him. The 1890s brought new challenges and triumphs. A drought in 1892 tested their resourcefulness, but they managed to keep their herd alive through careful water management and supplemental feeding. A banner year in 1894 allowed them to expand their holdings, purchasing an adjacent property that doubled their grazing land. Samuel grew into a serious boy who loved working alongside his father, learning everything he could about ranching. Sarah was bright and curious, with a gift for music that led them to buy a second-hand piano when a traveling salesman passed through. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into mischief, keeping Clara on her toes with his adventures. In 1896, Clara's mother came to visit from Kansas City, her first trip to Texas. She stayed for 3 months, delighting in her grandchildren and marveling at the life Clara had built. On her last night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she took Clara's hand. "Your father would be so proud of you," she said softly. "The woman you have become, the family you have raised, the life you have built. I am proud too." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I wish he could have known them. The children, I mean. And Cord. I think he knows. Wherever he is, I think he sees you and knows that his daughter is happy and loved and living a good life. Her mother squeezed her hand. That is all any parent wants for their child. After her mother left, Clara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place. 18 years ago, she had been a frightened young woman fleeing debt and loss. Now she was a wife, a mother, a rancher, a woman who had found her place in the world. The transformation still amazed her sometimes. As the new century approached, their oldest children were growing into young adults. Samuel was 17, tall and strong like his father, with Cord's quiet competence and Clara's compassion. He had started courting a girl from town, the daughter of the general store owner, and Clara could see a proposal coming within a year or two. Sarah was 15, beautiful and talented, with suitors already showing up at their door. Cord was a protective father, grilling each young man who came calling, but Clara could see him softening. Sarah had a good head on her shoulders, and she would choose well when the time came. Thomas, at 11, was still more boy than man, but showing signs of the person he would become. He had his father's love of horses and his mother's quick mind, and Clara suspected he would do something unexpected with his life, maybe become a veterinarian or a horse trainer rather than a rancher. On the last day of 1899, the Cordell family gathered on their porch to watch the sun set and talk about the new century ahead. Samuel and his girlfriend Emma sat close together, her hand in his. Sarah played with Thomas, both of them laughing at some private joke. Cord had his arm around Clara, and she leaned into his familiar warmth. "Can you believe we have been married 21 years?" Clara said softly. "Best 21 years of my life," Cord replied. "Though I have to admit, you look just as beautiful as the day I first saw you in that bunkhouse, covered in blood and sweat." Clara laughed. "You are a terrible liar, but I love you for it." "I am not lying." He turned her to face him, his expression serious. "You are even more beautiful to me now than you were then. Every year with you, every child we have raised, every challenge we have faced together, it has just made me love you more." After all these years, he could still make her heart flutter. "I love you too. So much." They kissed, ignoring the exaggerated groans from their children. Some things never changed, and the love between them was one of those constant, enduring things. As the new century dawned, the Cordell Ranch continued to thrive. Samuel married Emma in a beautiful ceremony in the spring of 1901, and they built a house on the far corner of the property. A year later, Clara became a grandmother for the first time when Emma delivered a healthy baby girl they named Clara, after her grandmother. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Clara was struck by the continuity of it all. She thought about her own mother holding her, about holding Samuel for the first time, and now this new life beginning. It was humbling and beautiful, and made her grateful for every moment of the journey that had brought her here. Sarah announced her engagement in 1903 to a young lawyer from Abilene who had swept her off her feet with poetry and persistence. The wedding was the social event of the season, with half the county in attendance. Cord walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and Clara cried through the entire ceremony. Thomas, true to Clara's predictions, announced at 15 that he wanted to study veterinary medicine. He apprenticed with the local veterinarian for 2 years before heading to college in 1905, becoming the first member of either family to pursue higher education. Clara and Cord were immensely proud, though they missed him terribly when he was away. The years continued to pass, marked by births and deaths, joys and sorrows, the normal rhythm of a life fully lived. Mr. and Mrs. Rutherford both passed away in the first decade of the new century, mourned by everyone who had known them. Clara's mother died peacefully in her sleep in 1908, surrounded by family. But there were also grandchildren, eventually 9 of them from their 3 children. There were Christmases filled with chaos and laughter, summer gatherings where 3 generations worked side by side, quiet evenings where Clara and Cord would sit on their porch and watch their family with satisfaction and love. In 1920, Cord and Clara celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, inviting everyone they had ever known. The house and yard were packed with people, multiple generations who had been touched by the Cordell family's kindness and generosity over the years. Samuel gave a speech, talking about the example his parents had set, about their love and devotion not just to each other, but to their family and community. Sarah sang, her voice still beautiful, even in middle age. Thomas presented them with a photo album he had compiled, filled with pictures documenting their life together. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Cord and Clara walked out to the spot where they had first stood looking over their land all those years ago. The house had been expanded and improved over the decades, the barn rebuilt twice, the property enlarged. But the bones of it were the same. The dream they had dreamed together made real through decades of work and love. "Do you have any regrets?" Clara asked, leaning against her husband. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their bodies not as strong as they once were, but still healthy and active. "Not a single one," Cord said firmly. "Every decision I made that led me to you, I would make again in a heartbeat. Every challenge we faced, I am glad we faced it together. You are still the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Cordell. And you are mine." Clara turned in his arms, looking up at the face she knew as well as her own. "That day in the bunkhouse, when you asked me to stay close, I had no idea how literally I would take that. I have stayed close to you for 45 years, and I plan to stay close for as many more as we are given." They kissed, as they had kissed thousands of times over the years, and it still felt like magic. Some loves fade with time, worn down by familiarity and disappointment. But theirs had only deepened, roots growing stronger with every passing season. The 1920s brought more changes. Samuel took over most of the ranch operations, though Cord still supervised and offered advice. Sarah's husband became a judge, and they moved to a larger house in town, though they visited frequently. Thomas opened his own veterinary practice, becoming one of the most respected animal doctors in the region. Clara slowed down some, her joints aching on cold mornings, but she was still the heart of the family. She taught her granddaughters to cook and sew, told her grandson stories about the old days, and presided over family gatherings with grace and love. She and Cord were the center around which 3 generations orbited, the foundation on which the family was built. In the spring of 1928, Cord fell ill with pneumonia. It was a terrifying time, and for a few days Clara thought she might lose him. She barely left his side, holding his hand, praying harder than she had prayed in years. Their children gathered, and she could see them preparing for the worst. But Cord was tougher than pneumonia. He fought his way back from the brink, his strength returning slowly but surely. Within a month, he was up and moving around, and within 3 months he was almost back to his old self. Clara thanked God every day for giving her more time with the man she loved. "You scared me," she told him one evening after he had fully recovered. They were in their usual spot on the porch, watching another sunset. "I scared myself," Cord admitted. "There were moments when I thought I might not make it, but every time I started to slip, I would think about you, about all the things we still have not done, and I would fight harder." "What things have we not done?" Clara asked curiously. They had lived a full life, traveled throughout Texas, seen their children grown and settled. What could possibly be left? "I have never taken you to the ocean," Cord said. "You told me 45 years ago that you wanted to see it. We should go. This summer, let's go to the Gulf, stay in a hotel, walk on the beach. What do you say?" Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. That he had remembered that conversation, that detail from so long ago, moved her deeply. "I say yes. I say absolutely yes." They made the trip in July, taking the train to Galveston. It was a grand adventure, their first real vacation in 50 years of marriage. They stayed in a hotel right on the water, and Clara stood on the beach with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the vastness of the ocean and the fact that she was finally seeing it. Cord took her hand, and they walked along the shore, the waves lapping at their feet. They were old now, their steps slower than they once were, but they were together, and that was what mattered. "Thank you," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for remembering, for bringing me here." "Thank you for staying close," Cord replied, echoing his words from that first day. "Thank you for saying yes to me all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me." They stood at the edge of the ocean, 2 people who had loved each other through everything life could throw at them, and watched the sun set over the water. It was a moment of perfect peace, perfect contentment, a fitting punctuation mark on a life shared. The years continued on. The country survived the Great Depression, though it hit rural areas hard. The Cordell Ranch struggled but survived, partly due to good management and partly due to the family pulling together. Grandchildren grew up and started families of their own, and Clara found herself a great-grandmother, marveling at how time had passed. Cord and Clara grew older, their bodies failing in small ways, but their minds and hearts still sharp. They moved a bit slower, needed a bit more help, but they were still together, still in love, still the center of their family's world. On a warm spring evening in 1938, 55 years after they first met, Clara and Cord sat on their porch watching yet another sunset. It had been a good day, filled with visits from grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with laughter and love. "I think this might be my favorite one yet," Clara said, nodding toward the sunset. "You say that about every sunset," Cord teased gently, "because they keep getting better." She looked at him, at this man who had been her partner, her love, her best friend for more than half a century. "Everything keeps getting better with you." Cord took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "I love you, Clara. I have loved you every day for 55 years, and I will love you every day for as long as we both shall live." "And beyond," Clara added softly. "I believe our love will continue beyond this life, into whatever comes next." "Then I will find you there too," Cord promised. "In this life and the next, I will always stay close to you." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Around them, their ranch thrived, 3 generations of family living and working on the land they had built from nothing. Inside the house, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren were starting to gather for dinner, their voices rising in happy chaos. Clara thought about that day in 1883, when she had been tending wounds in a bunkhouse and a cowboy had watched in awe. She thought about how he had asked her to stay close and how she had been staying close ever since. She thought about all the years in between, the challenges and triumphs, the ordinary moments that had woven together into an extraordinary life. "Come on," she said, standing and pulling Cord up with her. "Let's go inside. Our family is waiting." They walked into their home hand in hand, surrounded by the sounds of love and laughter, the legacy of a love that had started with a simple request and had grown into something that would echo through generations. The wild west of their youth had been tamed, turned into towns and ranches and civilization, but the wildness they had found in each other, that untamed love that had sparked in a moment of crisis and been nurtured through decades of devotion, that remained as fierce and vital as ever. They had built a life together from nothing but faith and hard work and love, and it was a life worth living, a story worth telling. As Clara looked around the dinner table that night, seeing the faces of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them here because she had said yes to a cowboy in a bunkhouse 55 years ago, she felt a profound sense of peace and completion. This was her legacy, this family, this love, this life. She had tended wounds that day long ago, but she had also healed herself, finding purpose and belonging in a place she never expected. And the cowboy who had watched in awe and asked her to stay close had become the foundation of everything she held dear. They lived out their days together on that ranch in Texas, growing older but never losing the spark that had drawn them together. When Cord passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 86, Clara grieved deeply, but without regret. They had been given 57 years together, years filled with more love and joy than many people experienced in multiple lifetimes. Clara lived another 3 years without him, surrounded by family, tended to by the children and grandchildren who loved her. She spoke often of Cord, keeping his memory alive with stories and laughter. And when her time came in the spring of 1941, she went peacefully, a smile on her face, as if she could see something beautiful waiting for her. They buried her next to Cord on a hill overlooking their ranch, under the wide Texas sky they had both loved so much. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates, but also an inscription that Samuel had chosen: together in life, together in eternity. The ranch continued on through subsequent generations, the Cordell name becoming synonymous with integrity and hard work in that part of Texas. The house Clara and Cord had built together remained standing, expanded, and modernized, but still fundamentally the same structure they had designed together all those years ago. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the prairie, people swore they could see two figures on the porch, sitting close together, watching the sunset hand in hand, staying close just as they had always done, their love story echoing through time as a reminder that even in the wildest places, even in the hardest times, love could take root and flourish and become something that lasted forever. Their story became legend in the family, passed down through generations, a tale of how love at first sight could become love of a lifetime, how a moment of crisis could lead to a lifetime of devotion, how two people from different worlds could build something beautiful together. It was a story about staying close, about choosing each other every day, about building a life with your hands and your heart and your unwavering commitment to the person you loved. The Wild West faded into history, but the love story of Clara and Cord Cordell remained timeless, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create legacies that echoed through generations. From that first moment in a bunkhouse where she was tending wounds and he was watching in awe, to their last moments together decades later, they had stayed close, and in staying close, they had found everything worth finding in life.